Attorney General. Coming to you live from the Broadway Performance Hall at Seattle Central College on Capitol Hill. Brought to you by Seattle City Club and the Washington State Debate Coalition. With special thanks to presenting sponsors AARP of Washington and Comcast. And appreciation of our event and venue sponsors, our civic sponsors, and premier media partners. With production support from WV Livestream.
Hello and good evening. I'm Hannah Kim with Fox 13 Seattle. Joining me tonight for this important debate, we've got Libby Deckman here with KUOW, Shauna Sowersby, Cascade PBS, and Laurel Demkovich with the Washington State Standard. And of course, our two candidates for Attorney General, Nick Brown, Pete Serrano. Thank you both for being here and taking the time. We'll be asking a lot of questions, but as far as the rules are concerned, very simple. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. They will have 45 seconds to answer initial questions. We will lead a moderated discussion with 20 seconds for rebuttals or follow-up questions. And each candidate will end with 60-second closing statements. We have asked our live audience to remain respectfully silent from here on out. No cheers or boos. You can follow at home using the hashtag WAElects. We tossed a coin backstage to determine who would make the first opening statement. Nick Brown, you won that coin toss and you have elected to go first. You have 60 seconds, Mr. Brown.
Well, thank you to the Washington State Debate Coalition, the Seattle City Club, Seattle Central College for hosting us, and thank you, Pete, for being here as well. The race for Attorney General is incredibly important for Washington families, Washington businesses, and all of our communities. And I'm excited about taking on that immense responsibility. People that know me know that I'm here because my parents always taught me to care about my community, to give a damn about what happens, and they're veterans and public servants. And I took that foundation with me all throughout my career. And all throughout my life, I've tried to keep people safe and use the law as a tool for justice. When I started my career in the Army, when I worked for the Department of Justice, when I worked down in Olympia on complex law and policy issues, and when I served as the United States Attorney for Western Washington, the chief federal law enforcement officer for this district, I've kept those values with me the entire time. There are clear contrasts in this race in terms of experience, readiness to lead, and values, but I look forward to the debate tonight, and thank you again.
Thank you for hosting us. Nick, thanks for being here. Seattle City Club, thank you for the opportunity. AARP, Comcast, thank you for sponsoring this. And of course, Seattle Central College, thank you for hosting us in this beautiful building. I'm Mayor Pete Serrano, and I take that title seriously. I was elected to City Council in Pasco after being there only 2 years because of the leadership I showed in the community, because I care about the community. We've got a diverse body of people who reside in Pasco, and we've got a myriad of needs that have been met over the 7 years I've been a council member and now a mayor. I was elected in 2017, then re-elected in 2021, then elected by my peers as mayor because they knew that coming out of COVID, they needed leadership, and that leadership resided in Pete Serrano. We've battled homelessness, opioid crises, we've battled addiction issues, and I will talk about how we've overcome and achieved those and made sure there's adequate housing for our people in Pasco, and you'll hear about my leadership.
Let's dive right into your office priorities. Mr. Brown, if elected, what would you want to accomplish in the first year in office?
Well, I fundamentally believe the principal obligation is to be the lawyer for the people of the state of Washington, to work hard to keep them safe, to defend their rights, and to advocate on their behalf no matter what the challenges are. The secondary responsibility is being the lawyers for the state of Washington to make sure the state government is working as best as can. And my job is to build the best professional law firm that we can on behalf of the people to make sure that they are serving the public as best they can. And we have big challenges about keeping people safe, about dealing with some root cause problems that are making this a less safe place to live, about dealing with some of the inequities that we have in this state. But I know that with my experience and background as a leader, as a lawyer, that I will bring those values to bear on behalf of the people of the state of Washington.
Mr. Serrano?
And thank you. The first priority is getting to know the office. There are 13 geographic offices throughout the state. That means you have 13 diverse set of opinions, people that are going to report to me as Attorney General. I'm going to need to understand what their background is and how they're serving the people of Washington and whether they're serving the people of Washington. If they're floundering, if they're failing the people of Washington, that's where leadership comes in. And that's where I need to stand up and say, hey, look, our priorities, transparency, open government, and providing the people the protection they're right, and making sure that, that the state of Washington is a safe and an accommodating place to live. That's what we need to start with. That's what I'll lead with.
Thank you both for that. I want to switch gears to public safety, specifically youth violence. Teen violence is at unprecedented levels, with kids as young as 13 years old committing crimes like armed robberies and carjackings. The AG's office does not have direct responsibility, of course, going after these cases. However, as AG, you can advise state agencies and influence priorities. If you were the AG, would you address this issue of teen violence? And if so, in what way? Mr. Serrano.
Yeah, Ms. Kim, thank you for citing that instance, those two instances that occurred last night in Federal Way with 13-year-olds bumping a car, running into a car, and then carjacking it. We absolutely need to teach our kids. We need to discipline them. Part of that disciplinary action will come from the schools, it will come from the parents, it will come from home, but it needs to come from the state as well. If we're not enforcing the rule of law, there's no way we can make Washington State safe. As I've walked around, I've talked to folks on the street. I came here 3 hours early for that specific purpose. Consistently heard, I'm concerned about the folks that are homeless and the safety issues. And that trickles down to the children and adults. And the Attorney General has the opportunity to work with local law enforcement and federal agents to make this place safe.
I do have a follow-up to that, Mr. Serrano. I know you said that you have to hold, accountability and you need to discipline kids. Is there specific things that you would do as AG, though? Is it a task force? Is it legislative action? What would you specifically do to address this issue?
One of the first things I'd do is work with the King County Council, make sure that detention centers are not shut down. I'd want to make sure that there is space for the children so that they can actually come in and have the opportunity to recover and be rehabilitated. If we can't lead with compassion, if we can't teach them, we're just going to keep them locked up, and that gets nobody anywhere.
Well, I don't know if you're going to get a whole lot of agreement tonight between Pete and I, but I would agree that the top priority is to keep Washingtonians safe, and that translates down to our youth as well. And all across the state, not just in King County, we're seeing youth violence at very concerning levels. What I will do is bring my experience to bear, and I've spent most of the last 22 years as a lawyer, as a leader, working on public safety matters. I've literally prosecuted hundreds of cases of drug crimes, guns crimes, people taking advantage of other people, protecting children in court. I know what it's like to lead complex investigations, to do this work, and we have to be focused on our youth. I do think the AG's office should be a resource for local jurisdictions to make sure that we can address any backfill or challenges they have. We can be a resource better for the legislature to make sure they're drafting policy that addresses some of these problems that we're facing. And we also have to recognize that children are different than adults. The standards and discipline and actions we take for our children should not be the same for adults who have better brain capacity to recognize the crimes that they're committing.
When you say resources, could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You said in the beginning of your question that the AG's office does not have very much direct criminal jurisdiction, but we can help local jurisdictions deal with these issues at their request. And so I want to make sure that jurisdictions all across Washington understand that we will have expertise and assistance if they request it from the Attorney General's office or if the governor's office requests it, and make sure that we're partnering with them in that proactive way.
When it comes to sexually violent predators, the AG does have direct responsibilities here. So in the AG's office right now, do you think that they are keeping the public safe from high-risk predators? And if not, what is one change you would make in managing this population of high-risk predators? Mr. Brown.
No, I absolutely think that we have a very important responsibility to deal with this serious problem. And I have done that in my career. I have prosecuted sexually violent predators. I have prosecuted people who have abused children. I know what it's like to stand in court and hold the hand of a victim who's terrified of her accuser, who's been charged with a crime. So I'm going to bring that experience and make sure that we lean into this. The thing that I think we need to do moving forward is to make sure that division has the proper resources. And I know that the need can vacillate over time, but I want to make sure that we add more resources to that, more prosecutors to that division, to make sure we're expediting some of the appeals and the decisions that are happening, and to continue to be a resource to local jurisdiction. But I think to do that well, you have to have done it before. And that's what I'll bring, is that experience doing it before.
Yeah, one of the opportunities we're going to have as the next Attorney General is that of working with local jurisdictions. When I've talked with my local prosecutors, both in Benton, Franklin, and even up in Kittitas County, I've heard consistently this message. We've asked for assistance from the Attorney General's office, and unless it's aligned with Bob Ferguson's priorities, we're not getting that assistance. For me, it doesn't matter what the priority is. It's safety for the public of Washington. It's safety for all Washingtonians, regardless of your race, your color, your creed, or your identity. It's making sure that these people have the resources. And the Attorney General's office has the opportunity to provide those resources. And one thing that we're reading about the current Attorney General's office, they're largely ignoring what they're seeing from experts on the McNeil Island, and they're not treating these individuals properly. We need to get them treatment.
I want to go to public safety in general. Mr. Serrano, you posted a video online walking on 3rd Avenue in downtown Seattle saying the city is in the midst of confusion, chaos, and decay. With the city of Seattle trying and failing for many years to clean up places like 3rd Avenue, is it realistic to believe an attorney general could make any meaningful difference in this area? If so, how would you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll harken back to my time as a city council member and mayor of Pasco. I've led with compassion, and I've led with a loud voice. The ability to speak and to have people hear you, the ability to use the power of whether it's the mayoral position or whether it's the Attorney General's position, to go down and say, we're going to work with you. We're going to hold you, City of Seattle, accountable. We're going to hold you, King County, accountable. We want to make sure that this is safe, not only for our residents, but for tourists who come in and coming out. Talking with folks in the tourist industries, they're very concerned about people getting on and off cruise ships. We need to use the power of the pulpit to speak and stand for the people of Washington. That's the most meaningful way to make change.
Mr. Brown, when you were the U.S. Attorney of Western Washington, part of your job was going after big-time drug dealers. In 2023, you told KNKX Radio that tougher prosecution wasn't the answer. Just this week, you said again you believed in the least amount of prison time necessary to meet public safety. The word necessary is subjective in this case, so elaborate on the factors you used to determine what a necessary sentence was for drug convictions.
No, absolutely. And all throughout my career, I've done this work. I did it when I was in the Army, when I prosecuted people and represented people in court. I did it for 6 years as an assistant United States attorney here in Western Washington. I did it as the chief federal law enforcement officer. With that comes deep and rich experience, analyzing cases, working with the law enforcement community, working with the victims who are impacted by these crimes. And I know that when we advise people about how to perceive justice and safety, that no two cases are alike. And so we have to look at each individual case and say, does this make us safer? And so what I would tell my team is, you figure out, based on your expertise, the advice from your leadership, the viewpoint of law enforcement and victims, what do we think is necessary to hold this person accountable? And then we go in and ask for what is necessary. To me, that is justice. That is how we achieve justice and safety.
Just a follow-up question there. What do you say to the people when they hear the least amount of prison time necessary, that you're too soft on crime? What would you respond to that?
Well, I don't get caught up in catchphrases like soft on crime. I get caught up in what works and what results look like. And that comes with deep experience. And so I have prosecuted hundreds of cases. I have stood in court and advocated for lengthy sentences of decades at times. I've also advocated for justice and leniency where it's appropriate, because we have to recognize that there is not a cookie-cutter slogan that makes us safer, but there's actual perspective and wisdom that comes with trying these cases for many, many years.
We want to move on to the issue of prosecutions of law enforcement officers. Last year, the Attorney General's office charged 3 Tacoma police officers in the death of Manny Ellis. It was the first time the AG's office had done that. A jury found the officers not guilty. As Attorney General, how would you decide to pursue use of force cases against law enforcement officers? And explain your reasoning. Mr. Serrano first.
Thank you. In looking at that, that issue. I've talked with law enforcement officers who've expressed to me the issue of the Attorney General's office policy on use of force. They've told me it's muddy, it's unclear, it's not quite followable, it's not understandable. The Attorney General has an obligation, if he's going to prosecute those officers, to give them a very clear, objective standard, no subjectiveness. And that becomes very difficult because you're talking about split-second decision-making. What we need is making sure these individuals understand their standard, and that may come with rewriting the policy. That may come with working with outside consultants. That may come with working with legal industry experts. I don't know that the AG's office is the right place to house that, but at least it's a place to start with experts who have real measurable experience in the field.
Mr. Brown.
To achieve that goal of safety, we have to have trust and accountability for law enforcement. We have to have trust that the public knows that law enforcement is acting in their best interest. And so I would analyze those cases like every other single case that I've analyzed. Was a law broken? Can we bring a charge? Do we have evidence to sustain that? It's not a matter of an AG policy. It's whether Washington state law was violated or not. And so I will look very closely at other alleged uses of forces by law enforcement and bring decades of experience of analysis to bear on that work. And we will decide, was this unlawful by this law enforcement officer? Do we have the evidence to prove that crime? Can we convince a jury that this is the right charge to bring? And if so, we will charge that person. And if not, we will not. But we don't want to guess about what we will do. We want to rely on someone who's actually done that work before, and that is the experience that I have.
Mr. Serrano, I think you were anticipating my question there, but a bill introduced in Olympia earlier this year would have created a unit within the Attorney General's office to pursue charges against police for deadly use of force. That bill did not pass, but it could be revived. This question goes to Mr. Brown first. Would you support that bill, and do you believe the Attorney General's office is the right place for such an office?
Well, I'll revert as a start back to what I just said, that the way you make the community safer is when you have more confidence and faith and trust in law enforcement. And I think the idea of having an independent office of review within the Attorney General's office will help achieve that goal. We'll obviously have to see what the policy looks like if it's reintroduced this next session. We'll have to see what the stakeholder input would be. But I do not see why it would live in any other jurisdiction in state government. There's been talk in the past about the governor's office or some new agency creating it. There is expertise and wisdom in the AG's office to handle that responsibility if the legislature entrusts us with it. And I know, having worked with the men and women in the Attorney General's office over many years, I know that they have the experience and professionalism to do that job well. And if the legislature passes that bill, I'd welcome that opportunity.
Mr. Serrano.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the right place to house that for several reasons. One, as we've heard, much of what the Attorney General's much of what the Attorney General's work is civil work, not primarily criminal. I don't know that the expertise resides there. I do know this. Down in eastern Washington, where I reside, in talking to local law enforcement, they have special investigative units. That means if Benton County has a crime, Kittitas County, Walla Walla County, other folks who actually have lived experience on the streets, interacting with individuals, having been trained, the Attorney General's office is trained to be lawyers, not to be secondhand cops. And I think that's a big concern about housing that unit within the AG's office.
I think there's some confusion, though, because the bill that you're talking about is an Office of Independent Prosecution. We already have in state law an Office of Independent Investigation that does some of the work of investigating offenses. What we're talking about is prosecuting offenses, alleged crimes, and the bill that has been contemplated over the last couple of sessions is to create that Office of Independent Prosecution, which requires lawyers. And there are good quality prosecutors that have done this work, decades of experience from other county offices that work for the state. And if the state passes that bill, I think we should entrust them to do that work.
Let's move on.
I want to switch to Washington's drug possession laws. After years of debating laws surrounding drug possession, the legislature last year approved an overhaul of the state's drug laws, making possession a gross misdemeanor while providing some expanded substance use treatment to those who need it. Mr. Serrano, we'll start with you. Do you support Washington's current drug laws? And if not, what changes might you ask lawmakers to pursue?
Yeah, when I've looked at those laws, I look at what we've done in the city of Pasco. Primarily what we've done is make sure that it's going to dovetail into two things. There have been recent Supreme Court cases that have helped us ensure that folks aren't continually loitering or sitting and staying. So the city of Pasco has adopted these ordinances to move folks along. One of these issues is related to drug possession. What we can't have is a drug possession law where we don't focus on, you've mentioned treatment, but I've talked with different judges, and they tell me that an individual gets charged in their court and then has possession issues in another county and takes a bed but never uses that bed in court A and never uses the bed in court B. We need to hold these folks accountable throughout the system and make sure they're actually seeking treatment. That's one of the things I'd want to make sure we're doing, is actually making sure they're following the treatment pattern prescribed through the judicial process.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, I think the legislature ultimately ended in the right place. And these are difficult decisions to make for a legislative body to find the right balance between accountability and treatment. But I was happy that the legislature found a solution after much debate about it. I do think we need to keep our focus on the people that are most culpable for some of the drug problems that we're seeing here in this state. And we're seeing a real fentanyl crisis in particular here in Washington. And fentanyl cases was the number one type of case that my office did when I was the United States Attorney because of the immense damage that it's doing to our communities. But I want to make sure that we're focusing our resources first and foremost on the people bringing drugs into our community, principally Mexican-based drug cartels up and down the I-5 corridor. But we're never going to solve the problem with just that alone. We need to make sure that we're also getting to people's root addictions and providing the treatment and services for them as well.
I do want to follow up quickly, and we'll start with you, Mr. Brown. You mentioned fentanyl. Without having a direct lawmaking or even criminal prosecution ability, what is the Attorney General's role in combating the fentanyl crisis?
Well, there's a lot of work that needs to happen working with our local jurisdictions, as we've already talked about. You know, if they have a resource need from the AG's office, we should try to provide that with our internal lawyers and teams as well. We need to make sure we're advising the legislature to craft policy that is easy to understand, not only for the law enforcement community, but for the general community as well, and to be an advocate around this. You know, and I looked back at what AG Rob McKenna did, the AG.
That's time, sorry.
Sure.
Mr. Serrano, 20 seconds.
Yeah, one of the most important things, as Nick already said, is you can partner with local jurisdictions. I've seen the investment that we've made in Pasco make it safer. We've seen folks who consume fentanyl, folks who move fentanyl through our community. It's been very clear that moving fentanyl through our community is not welcome here. We're going to prosecute it as best as possible. The AG can work on that.
We're going to move on to gun control. In April, a judge struck down Washington State's ban on high-capacity magazines. The issue is expected to be decided by the state Supreme Court this fall. Starting with you, Mr. Serrano, how would you handle this case if you were Attorney General?
Yeah, obviously that's the case that I'm currently working on. I'm representing the individuals who were alleged to have sold high-capacity magazines. So I'm going to have to likely recuse myself from that one. I think that's going to be a bit difficult, having been on the inside of the other side of that one. But the reality is we need to make sure that each individual, when I look at our communities, they're getting torn apart by these drugs. They're getting torn apart by violence. When I look at the large capacity magazines and the assault weapons bans, we had a lot of the impacted communities who are coming to the gun shops looking for safety and protection. We cannot ban protection in Washington. That does not work.
Mr. Brown?
Firearm violence in Washington and indeed America might be one of the most pressing problems that we have. Not only crimes that are committed by firearms, but suicide deaths, which is actually the leading cause of firearm deaths in Washington state. And this is an area where Pete and I could not disagree with more. He has spent much of his career trying to undermine gun safety laws here in Washington state, passed by the people, passed by the legislature. He is advocating for more guns, for more dangerous guns. He is advocating for more ammunition in our community. He even supports not regulating ghost guns, which don't have serial numbers on them, which the law enforcement community almost universally has expressed disapproval for because they're so dangerous, because they're very, very difficult to trace. I do not believe that is the answer. I believe as a state, we need to continue to advance gun safety measures here in Washington because that has results and saves lives.
And I'll hop in here because we did see Nick take one extra 20-second earlier. I'll just simply note that I've continually advocated for individual rights, for the ability for the individual to protect him or herself, whether it's individuals who are suffering from domestic violence, folks who are just walking out on the street. You can't walk out on the street and always feel safe, especially as we move up and down the state. So I've been advocating to make sure those folks have the ability to protect themselves.
And a quick 20-second follow-up for both of you. I'll start with you, Mr. Brown. Would you push for any additional gun safety measures at the state level if elected?
I think we constantly need to try to advance things that work and save lives. You know, in Washington, we were one of the few states in the country to reduce suicide deaths, in part because of our gun safety laws. And so I will constantly work with the legislature to see if there's new policies that is data-driven, that has results, that is constitutional, that will keep us safer. I just don't believe more guns and more dangerous guns on our streets is the answer.
Mr. Serrano?
Yeah, one of the issues that we're seeing is just the violation of individual rights. What we need to do is make sure that the legislature is understanding what its limitations are, what the Constitution says, what the United States and the Washington State Supreme Court have said. Those are the things that should drive these bills. They will drive safety, and we need to make sure that our children are protected from themselves even.
Mr. Serrano, this year the AG's office announced a first-of-its-kind hate crime hotline set to start next July. The pilot project will take calls from people in King, Spokane, and Clark counties. A member of our audience submitted this question, asking if you will continue the pilot project, and if so, why or why not?
Yeah, I think if we're going to have the pilot project, I think it's great to target those few counties. But again, hate crimes exist everywhere. Every community has a marginalized community. Every community needs to have a voice. I'm a little concerned if we're going to do a pilot program, we're just cherry picking 3 counties. I understand they're 3 of the largest counties, but what about Franklin County, where I reside? Hate crimes exist there too. Do those people not get protection? So if we're going to continue it, let's expand it to all of Washington, and let's figure out what the right size is. Let's make sure that we're vetting these calls. Let's make sure we're providing the adequate resources, and where there are punitive measures that need to be taken, let's take those. Where there are healing measures, let's give those to the folks that are subjected to these issues.
Mr. Brown?
Absolutely, because Washington State has had some of the highest hate crimes in America per capita. You know, we think of Washington as an inclusive and welcoming state, but for many years we've been in the top 10s of hate crimes. Crimes against people because of their identity, their gender, who they love, their religion. This is a huge problem. When I was the U.S. Attorney, I was the chair of the Civil Rights Subcommittee for all of the United States attorneys in the country, and taking on hate crimes was one of the big priorities of our office. And I think that expanding the program that we've developed is going to be a big priority. The reason it's been limited to a few counties thus far is because, as you described it, it's a pilot program. This is how pilot programs develop. You don't simply put it in every county. But I think we're seeing really encouraging opportunity with that program to make sure that people have another chance to interact with their government to address some of the really big problems that we're facing.
We're going to move on to the issue of reproductive health care access. Washington law protects abortion access. And last year, the Attorney General of Washington State sued the FDA over rules reducing access to the abortion drug mifepristone. More challenges could come through the courts or a future presidential administration. Mr. Serrano, would you go to court to protect Washington residents' access to mifepristone?
When it comes to abortion access, this has been a settled question since 1970. It was done through the voice of the people, through a referendum. The Washington Constitution allows you to express your voice to your legislature on 3 occasions. That's a recall of an officer, that's through the referendum, and that's through the initiative process. I find that those are 3 of the most sacred processes protected by our Constitution, and granted, we are very unique in having those. So there's no reason that I would go and undo what's been done for 50 years. And so my opportunity to protect the individual rights, unless the legislature speaks, unless the people speaks, that's my job, is to protect what's protected.
So just to be clear, is that a yes or a no on whether you would go to court if there was a threat to access to mifepristone?
I intend to go to court on that.
You would go to court for that. Mr. Brown?
Well, that's the first time that he said that he would have sued the federal government to protect that access. And I applaud you for taking that stand consistent with what A.G. Ferguson said. I would agree with Pete that we have some of the best laws protecting abortion access here in America, but I would disagree that it's a settled question because, as you note, the law constantly evolves, and the changes that we've seen on the federal government level are impacting people here in Washington. We've seen almost 24 states have changed their laws to restrict or deny abortion access in America. Many of those women are now coming to Washington. We've seen healthcare systems here have an extreme increase in the need for healthcare services, 20% more abortion requests here in Washington state in just the last couple of years. And we need to make sure that we're advancing the ball on these protections, not just simply relying on the laws that were passed in the 70s.
20-second follow-up. Washington currently has a shield law protecting patients seeking abortions from out of state against criminal investigations. Mr. Brown, do you think it is Washington's job to protect patients from other states from local prosecution?
We need to protect people within our state, whether they are lifelong residents here, whether they're tourists who are coming here, whether they're coming here for healthcare services that they are obligated to get, that they have a right to have. And just because the state of Idaho has changed their abortion laws, I'm not going to stop protecting women who come here for the healthcare that they need and deserve.
Mr. Serrano.
Yeah, I really struggle with that one. We have 50 several states that have the ability to legislate as they see fit. The notion that we would try to undo legislation from another state, I think that puts us in a really strong predicament. And why wouldn't those states seek to undo all of our laws? I cannot stand for that.
Mr. Serrano, in recent years, the legislature has debated a bill that would give the Attorney General's office the power to block or oversee hospital mergers. Is this a proposal you agree with? Why or why not?
I appreciate that question. Healthcare is one of the most important things that are at the issue of this debate. We've heard it several times, time and time again. The opportunity for the Attorney General to oversee mergers is one of the critical elements of the Consumer Protection Act. However, when I see this, I'm very concerned about what happens to Connell, what happens to some of the smaller folks up in the San Juan Islands, where they may need consolidated health care. Why should that reside in the Attorney General's office to oversee that transaction? I'm very concerned that this will have significant detrimental impacts to our rural areas, and so I have concerns with this bill.
Mr. Brown.
I think the Keep Your Care Act was a really important step to get to one of the most fundamental issues that we're facing here in Washington, and that is healthcare issues. And we are seeing real negative impacts on some of the consolidation efforts and proposals. We're seeing that impact manifest because we're seeing consolidation driven by religious-based hospital associations that are denying services like abortion, like access for transgender care, and a host of other areas that they don't want to do. We're also seeing healthcare deserts get created where consolidation happens and you live in a small community and you can no longer access the healthcare that you need. And so there's an opportunity to provide oversight and transparency. And one of the best parts of that bill, I think, is the opportunity for the public to know more about what may happen to their healthcare opportunities in their community. And I welcome that responsibility in the AG's office.
One of the Attorney General's core responsibilities is enforcing Washington's Consumer Protection Act. Over the last 10 years, more than $2 billion has been returned to consumers through this legal action. Mr. Brown, if elected, what aspects of consumer protection will your office prioritize?
Well, I think it's really important that you highlight that because the Attorney General's office is one of the few aspects of government that actually returns money to the public. And we've seen some very important aggressive litigation, not only from A.G. Ferguson, but from A.G. McKenna and A.G. Gregoire. You know, I was an intern with A.G. Gregoire way before I went to law school, and she was coming on the cusp of the very important tobacco litigation, which Washington State led. And I think we should always be looking for opportunities to lead, to protect individuals from fraud, from misrepresentation, from companies that are trying to take advantage of them. One of the areas I'm most excited about pursuing next is around housing. No matter where I go in the state, people are very concerned about housing. And as we see more consolidation in the housing market, I want to make sure that consumers' rights are protected so housing can be easier to get and more affordable and accessible.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you. One of the sponsors is AARP, so I'm going to throw that out there. Our elderly folks need protections. I mean, half the time I feel like I can barely operate my computer, my social media, and I'm always getting spam. I'm always getting these emails. Our elderly folks, especially when it comes to computer-based fraud, are going to need assistance. The Attorney General's office really needs to step up the game and make sure that it's got the ability to enforce those fraudulent activities. I had a friend who told me about his parents who had a high-pressure sales, started online, and it would bankrupt them. I will give A.G. Ferguson the kudos he deserves and his team for saving those folks.
Mr. Serrano, I want to follow up on your point about fraud. I'm just wondering specifically if you can share some of your ideas for how you might protect Washington residents against fraud, especially as you mentioned, where there's an increasing number of scams and online crimes?
Yeah,
You'll have 20 seconds.
Sure. I think as we work with the legislature on penalizing cyber crimes, that would be certainly one opportunity. Working with folks in the IT space, again, I barely use my computer half the time. I'm not the guy that's a tech expert, but I think there are folks that are smarter than me that have the ability to say, hey, here's how we track fraudulent activity, and here's how you can follow it.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, what are some of your ideas? You'll have 20 seconds.
Well, housing is the first priority for me, to use the Consumer Protection Act to get at a very serious problem. But it's important that the next Attorney General actually have experience leading investigations in this work. I've prosecuted fraud cases. I've led multi-jurisdiction fraud cases. When the housing market crashed in 2008, 2009, I did multiple cases dealing with mortgage fraud, and that's the type of experience that I think we need in the Attorney General's office.
Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office is suing to block the proposed merger of Kroger and Albertsons. The Federal Trade Commission is pursuing its own case. A number of states have signed on to that. Mr. Serrano, if you were the Attorney General, how would you approach a similar major merger? When does it make sense for the state to get involved versus relying on a federal agency?
Yeah, the state needs to be looking out for the residents. That's whether it's crime, public safety, transparency, or a merger of conglomerates, whether that's, digital communications, whether that's insurance companies, or whether that's healthcare, or whether that's a grocery chain. The Attorney General always needs to look internally to the people of Washington, and if there's some sort of price gouging, price fixing, some sort of increase and lack of benefit that comes from the transaction, that's when the Attorney General needs to act on behalf of the people to protect them. And I look forward to doing that as your next Attorney General, and I look forward to doing that as I've continually sought to protect rights, and I've always sought to make my community better in Pasco by making sure that we look out for our community's benefit.
Mr. Brown.
Well, I'll agree with Pete on this one. I think it's very important that we're finding issues that impact Washingtonians. And whether it's a case like mergers or proposed mergers, my analysis is going to be the same. Is this in the best interest of Washingtonians? Do we have a case to bring? Are we the right avenue to bring it? Sometimes it makes great sense to partner with the federal government or with other states to lead big multi-jurisdictional investigations, particularly when we're seeing issues that affect us nationally. I think about the opioid crisis and how this was a national crisis and the opportunity to partner with other states. And I know that sometimes it's nice to have multiple cases going in multiple jurisdictions. Sometimes that's one of the best ways to get results. And I know with respect to the merger work that is being attacked and addressed now, that is one of the reasons that I think that they brought that suit, because to have multiple avenues of redress and recovery for people, that's sometimes the best way to do it.
The AG's core responsibility, one of the main ones, is to represent state government agencies. Is there a department that you believe is getting overlooked right now by the current AG's office? What is that area that's getting overlooked, and how would you improve that? Mr. Brown, let's start with you.
Well, it's easy to sit from the outside and cherry pick issues that are happening within state government. And I've had the pleasure and the opportunity of serving as a special assistant attorney general on numerous cases. I have tremendous respect and admiration for the men and women that are doing the hard work on behalf of the people and representing state government. But many aspects of our government have big problems. I'm particularly concerned about how we've been processing some of the cases in our mental health system. We've had a big federal litigation, the True Blood litigation, that's been going on now for many, many years, where people are being denied their competency restoration rights, and we've been held to account by that by a federal judge. And so my focus is going to be on improving that agency, but all across their states, there's ways we can improve our state government, improve the state provision of legal services, and I don't want to focus on just one.
Yeah, just quick follow-up on that, 20 seconds. How would you improve that, what you just brought up?
Well, we're going to have to come in and analyze what's been the problem thus far. And, having done that sort of review before in my experience, I know that it's not safe or prudent to prejudge what some of the problems are, because I haven't worked directly with some of those cases, but I've seen how important that issue is. And so we're going to bring some new review and analysis and my experience within the Department of Justice to improve those services.
Mr. Serrano.
Yeah, hearkening back to my time at the Department of Energy and Energy Northwest, which is a state agency, both down in at the Hanford site in Richland, I saw some issues that I'd like to address with the Department of Ecology. I struggle with some of the oversight. I struggle with some of the permitting conditions, and I don't mean this I personally struggled with. Legally, some of these issues weren't factually backed. They weren't scientifically backed. Some of the conditions of the permit to regulate nuclear waste If we want to make Washington safer, we've got to give it the tools to make it safer. And that comes down to making sure that the Attorney General is involved in helping to make sure that permit's regulatorily sound and scientifically sound. That experience in the energy and environmental industry will help us clean Washington and make sure it's safe.
20-second follow-up to that. When you say improvement, what does that mean exactly? Is it more manpower, more staffing, or is there something else?
I think there's going to be a sweet spot between advising. That's what the Attorney General does, right? It advises the agency. But there will also be an opportunity for us to provide resources of expertise, maybe bringing in outside experts to say, hey, look, this permit condition is getting challenged. It's not sound. We need to move on and fix the permit accordingly.
It's impossible to ignore the context of the election, of this election year, with the presidential election and Washington governor election right around the corner. There's a chance this election could result in a governor and attorney general of opposite parties. Mr. Serrano, how would you work across the aisle with a governor of a different party?
I would anticipate that we'd have the same goals. Keep Washington safe, protect the people, make sure our communities are engaged, make sure we have the opportunity to listen to them and respond to their needs according to their needs. I would hope that would be the goal of the governor, regardless of who it is. That's my goal. And I think when that's the goal that sets forth the agency, regardless of who the governor is, we'll find the way to make things right for the people of Washington. I will continually put their interests at the forefront, regardless of who's governor and regardless of who's president.
Mr. Brown.
You know, Washington has experienced this before with a governor and attorney general from different parties, and they found a way to keep the state moving forward. And I look forward to working with whomever the next governor is. And I know what it's going to be like to advise a governor about the legal issues that their state agencies are facing, because I've done that work. I served for 4.5 years as the general counsel for Governor Inslee, worked directly with their legal counsel and various agencies across the board. And I know how much work goes into making those agencies run. The next governor will come in with their own priorities, and it'll be my job to make sure they're getting the best sound legal advice. But we also have separate and independent authority to be the advocate for everyone at home, to make sure that we're exercising everything we can do to keep them safe and advocate to defend their rights. And that's going to be true regardless of who's in the governor's office.
Attorney General Bob Ferguson has sued the federal government a lot, upwards of 100 times. Mr. Brown, how would you defend Washington's laws against challenges from future presidential administrations, if necessary?
I'm really proud of the leadership that has happened here in Washington to stand up for Washingtonians. And I remember in 2017 when the Trump Muslim ban came out, the travel ban that discriminated against people based on their faith and where they came from. And Washington was the first state in the country to lead. And I remember what it took to lead that bold and aggressive action to stop an injustice, not only to protect people in Washington, but to change the course of justice for everyone in America. And I will do that same analysis that we did back in 2017. Is this best for Washingtonians? Do we have a case to bring? Are we the right people to bring it? And I have absolute confidence in my ability to lead the men and women of that office. And I also know that the threat we might face from a second Trump presidency is real, and we have to be prepared to defend Washington in January of 2025.
Mr. Serrano.
Yeah, I stand ready to protect the people of Washington. That is going to be the most important and critical role. As I've mentioned, it's my time as a mayor of Pasco. I consistently look at my constituents. They may not agree with me. We may have different backgrounds. It's a diverse city. But I'm consistently looking at them and saying, what is it that I can do to make your life better? Regardless of who's there in Washington, D.C., regardless of how the House or the Senate makeup turns out, my job as Attorney General will be to protect Washingtonians against anything, internal or external, including the President of the United States. And that's the guarantee that I make these folks, these people of Washington. I will stand for you.
Okay, I'm going to do a 20-second follow-up to you, Mr. Serrano. How would you defend a Washington law that you personally might not agree with?
Well, there's the defense of the law, and what the law says. The bottom line is we have to defend the laws as long as they're constitutional. I've said this all along. I want a group in my agency that reviews the law, reviews Supreme Court analysis, make sure that we're following the Constitution, and that's where we start.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up? If you were to believe that a law was unconstitutional, what would you do in that case?
I would talk to the group. I would have them analyze the law, and we'd come with whatever advice to the agency that we have or the legislature, and we'd want to advise them openly and transparently. It's not about what Pete Serrano thinks. It's about what legal precedents and the Constitution of Washington and the United States say.
Mr. Brown, how would you defend a Washington law that you personally might not agree with?
Pete is not saying what he said multiple times previously, is that he would not, in fact, defend laws that he thought were unconstitutional, that he would tell the legislature and the taxpayers to find outside counsel. He said that repeatedly around gun safety laws that have been passed here in the state of Washington. He has pledged that he won't defend them, that he will instruct the lawyers in the AG's office to find new jobs if they're not willing to do what he says. That is not the type of leadership we need in Olympia.
20-second for rebuttal.
Yeah. The reality is I'm going to advise the legislature according to the laws, and that's where we're going to go with it. The ability to defend the laws is the most critical thing that we have as the Attorney General. I will be there to defend the constitutionality of the laws. If they're unconstitutional, we'll talk about it. We can always, as Nick said, we can hire outside counsel like Pacifica Law Group.
Well, look, Washington's gun laws have been found constitutional thus far. These were passed by the people. These was passed by the legislature. He has pledged repeatedly not to defend those laws. Imagine you hire a lawyer and they tell you that, I'm sorry, you're out of luck because I personally disagree with it. It is our obligation as the Attorney General to defend the laws of the state of Washington. And that's what I will do as the Attorney General.
I want to move on to pushing legislation. The Attorney General has historically been involved in pushing for new laws. Mr. Brown, how active would you be in this space, and how much would you assert your own views?
I think there's a real unique opportunity for the Attorney General, like any other statewide officer, to look if there's policy improvements that we can have. We've seen that under Attorney General Ferguson. We've seen that under Attorney General Rob McKenna and Attorney General Gregoire. You know, looking back, one of the things that I think was a positive development in the policy space by an Attorney General was action taken by AG Rob McKenna when at the time we were facing a real big meth crisis here in Washington. And what he did was organize a task force to bring stakeholders together. He proposed new legislation to deal with the meth crisis that we were facing. And he brought people together, and actually the meth problem went down for a whole host of reasons. But I think that was a very important piece. I'm going to bring that same analysis to bear, to rely on the expertise of the men and women in the AG's office and see if there's a policy space and advancement that we can make.
Mr. Serrano.
Yeah, one of the things I have struggled with is watching sponsorship by the Attorney General of legislation. To me, it's the legislature's job to carry its duty to create the law, but it should be done so on sound advice from the AG's office. And so there's a partnering, but it's not that we go in and we sponsor. I will note there are opportunities where the AG's office can certainly come in for budgetary requests, other opportunities where it may need resources, where it may need some sort of tweak to the law. I don't have issues with that, but proposing, outright constitutional issues, I struggle with the AG's office being the one to do that. That's the legislature's purview.
Let's move on to worker protections for a second. This is a question from our audience. The audience is asking, how do you plan to ensure that labor laws are enforced effectively to protect workers' rights, particularly in sectors where wage theft, unsafe working conditions, and unfair labor practices are prevalent? Mr. Serrano.
Every day I go to work, I expect a fair wage. Every day I go to work, I expect to work in a safe place. I don't think there's anyone in this audience, and certainly raise your hand if you oppose that. We all expect a fair wage. What the employers agreed to, the employer must be beholden to. We cannot support wage theft. The Attorney General has enforcement authority to go after folks who are not paying proper wages, who are skirting labor laws to make a safe and efficient, I guess not efficient, but a safe working condition. That's part of the Attorney General's purview.
Well, first and foremost, I think we have one of the best and strongest workforces in America, and I'm really proud to call Washington home in part because of that reason. I'm proud to have the endorsement from the Washington State Labor Council, which represents so many hardworking employees in this state. One of my plans moving forward is to create a brand new division in the Attorney General's office, specifically around worker protection issues, to not only address wage theft, which is happening all across the state, but also to address worker safety conditions. And a lot of people aren't familiar with what wage theft is, but we have employees who are not being paid what their law requires of them. And, we think about crime and we think about someone who steals something from a Target, and we all want to hold that person accountable. But we have literally hundreds of millions of wage theft happening in America right now, and we need to bring that same intensity and focus to protecting them as well.
This is a 20-second follow-up question also from the audience. What steps will you take as Attorney General to protect the right of workers to unionize? Mr. Brown.
Well, as I said, I think this is one of the best things about Washington is that we have strong labor protections. The right to unionize in America and in Washington is so foundational. My grandfather was a machinist, and I know that his union membership gave my mother the opportunity to be the first person to go to college. And so I will do everything we can in Washington to protect union rights.
Yeah, that's going to be a critical issue. Obviously, we're seeing issues with Boeing Corporation right now, and it's hypercritical that we ensure that the workforce is supported. Like Nick, my grandfathers were both union members. My father was a union member, my mother too. So I've seen this impact and benefit my life. So I'll do everything I can to work with the legislature to make sure that those unions' abilities are protected.
On the topic of transparency, Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office was fined by a judge for withholding records in a lawsuit last year. And recently, Republicans have accused him of hiding a lawsuit that challenged the certification of signatures for ballot initiatives. I'm going to ask this question to Mr. Serrano first. Do you think transparency in the Attorney General's office can be improved, and how would you do that?
Yeah, I believe it can be improved. A couple of things. One of the things is making sure there's an adequate staff in the Public Records Act department. I know as a Public Records Act requester, things are delayed. There's an arcane process whereby I actually have to pay a check, and then I wait for either a CD-ROM, and I don't know anyone in this audience who actually has a CD-ROM on their computer. I don't. I know I'm not a tech guy, so I might be the outlier. But the reality is, the information needs to get to the public as quickly as possible. And then when I receive my records, I see them hyper-redacted. The question shouldn't be how much can we redact this and protect the information, but how much can we provide to the public while protecting any privileged information? I don't see that currently.
Just a quick follow-up. How would you go about deciding that less information needs to be redacted in a given Public Information Act request, for example?
Well, again, I'll talk to my experience. I've seen documents where all I get is a header and then all black. There's no way, no possible way, everything but the header is attorney-client privilege. I know that. I write memos. I draft briefs. I know that. There's no way all of it can be. So the way to go about deciding it, sit with your group and discuss it. Say, how is this protected or not?
Mr. Brown, do you think that there is an issue with transparency in the Attorney General's office? And what would you do if you were elected?
Transparency in government is so foundational, and we have one of the strongest Public Records Act in the country, and I think it provides more trust in government. The more that we explain to the public about the decisions we're making, the more opportunity they have to interface with their leaders, the more opportunity they get to have records from their government. That builds trust and faith in our government, and I will do everything I can to build upon that. When I served as Governor Inslee's counsel, he had made a pledge during his campaign to never exercise the executive privilege, the first governor who had ever taken that stance. And I was proud to make sure that that promise was fulfilled. He was the only governor in history to never use that privilege. I also served on the Public Records Accountability Committee, the Sunshine Committee, for many years, ensuring that more transparency was there. And so I will absolutely look to improve the AG's office's practices, and I know that there's more work to do.
Just curious, 20-second question for both of you. What is a lawsuit that AG Ferguson has pursued that you disagree with, and why? 20 seconds. Mr. Serrano.
As to
a specific lawsuit that he has filed that you disagree with.
Right. Trying to think of the ones that he's filed. I've obviously been on the other side, having filed several against him. Nothing specific comes to mind.
The one thing that I would say is that, and we've talked about the Albertsons case thus far, I think that was a really appropriate case. And I don't want to sit out here and just say what I would have done and would not have done, because you're not sitting in that chair to analyze the evidence. But the thing that I wanted to see in that case is to work collaboratively with the federal government to bring that case and move it forward. So I think there's a new opportunity there.
But that doesn't answer my question regarding, you don't have one case that you disagree with Mr. Ferguson.
Well, there's been thousands of cases over the last 12 years that he's brought, and I haven't sat in that corner office to make those decisions. And so I don't want to sit out here and say that that was the right decision or the wrong decision.
Okay. Thank you for those answers. Okay, that is all the time we have. And now it's time for our closing statements. Pete Serrano, you went second during opening statements, so you will go first. During closing, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you for attending tonight, and thank you for your time. I will say a case came to mind, the Value Village case. I won't dwell on that. That's one of the ones I do disagree with. I apologize that it didn't come to mind. I've been elected and reelected as city council and now elected by my peers as mayor because they see the leadership that I bring to the city of Pasco to bring transparency, something that we desperately need out of the AG's office, to bring public safety to forefront, to tackle our energy crisis, work with our producers and our transmitters, Bonneville Power and local agencies. I know what Washington needs. We need someone who's going to fight for us, to bring safe streets. That's why everything I do in Pasco is oriented towards that. That's why when I come out here, you've already mentioned it, I come out and I look at places that need help. Tonight, after this, I assure you, I'll be walking around the streets and asking folks how we can help protect them. And I invite all of you, including Nick, to come with us.
Well, thank you again to the Debate Coalition and the Seattle City Club, and for everyone who showed up in the audience and everyone that's watching at home. I'm so proud and humbled to be standing before you and advocating to be the next Attorney General for the people of the state of Washington. And I know what Washington voters are looking for, someone who has the legal experience, the leadership experience, and the values to move this state forward. And I have tremendous, unique experience that I know will help improve this state. I've served on both sides of the aisle as a criminal lawyer, leading hundreds of cases. I've done complex civil litigation, multiple jury trials. I know what it's like to lead an office because I've done it, having been the United States Attorney for Western Washington. And I've been taking on those leadership responsibilities all throughout my career. And I know my values are where Washington values are. I know that we have to defend our gun safety laws, which Pete won't do. I know we have to defend and advocate for greater abortion protections here in Washington, which Pete won't do. And I know we have to defend Washington from all of the challenges that are happening in other states and from the national government. And I will make sure that I do that on behalf of Washington. And I ask for your support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our evening. We'd like to thank our candidates, of course, and my colleagues here on the panel. You could register online or mail until October 28th. Make sure you vote. Election Day is November 5th. Thank you so much for our audience being here. We'll let you break your silence finally to show some appreciation for the candidates. From Seattle Central College, I'm Hannah Kim. For Fox 13 Seattle, good night.